I was going to open by saying that one of the joys of this conference has been being able to listen to the leaders of industry, the thought leaders from academia, the colleagues that have gone before me. This has only been tempered by the dread of having to follow them, and particularly with a title like this after John's dissection of our conference title. So what I'd like to do is just reflect on some of the things that have gone before in the conference. We've heard lots of times that the world we're trying to operate in is complex, and we didn't intend to have these consequences on the planet. But the system principles that have led us to this point are flawed, as was delightfully expounded by our previous speakers. And so we need to change. But we heard from Peter Price Thomas yesterday that interpreting these principles is incredibly challenging and turning them into action. But we also heard that this is absolutely what we need to do. We need to learn to play and to experiment better, faster, and more often in this space if we're going to start to move away from our current models to something approaching a more sustainable way of being. So, configurations. Basically, it's a description of what gets made where and how. The model that's emerged from the system principles that we've discussed at length is that we take stuff out the ground in various countries. We might ship it somewhere in the world's factory, China, and then we'll ship it to somewhere else where it's sold, used by someone, and often disposed of into these large holes that we call landfill. But sometimes, and more increasingly, as we've heard from our previous speakers, we sometimes recover it and it gets shipped somewhere else. So this is just a very simple coarse example of a configuration, what gets made where and how. And we've got good as manufacturers at tuning this system. A lot of the dimensions when we talk about manufacturing strategy are asking how you're trying to compete. So whether you're competing on cost, quality, delivery, flexibility, and we've had different analyses proposed by our academic colleagues that allow us to interrogate that and see how well it fits with the company strategy, and then deliver a structure which delivers the performance metric we want and which is embodied in the configuration of the industrial system. And by analysing this, we can gain insights into some of the key manufacturing decisions we have to make and essentially learn a little bit about what we need to be good at. But you can see on there that there's not much room for concepts that are becoming ever more of interest to industry, whether it's resilience, sustainability, or flourishing, as was proposed this morning. So, sustainability has been considering configurations for some time. Industrial ecology has helped us understand the material and energy flows and the relationships between different elements of the configuration. We've extended that into organisational relationships as well. And something that you saw this morning with Dr. Rana looks at business models and the value that's exchanged between different stakeholders and those relationships. Again, part of describing a configuration. We've seen from our industry leaders, and I've ruthlessly nicked this off Roy, so apologies for that, but it is one of the great examples of diagnosing some of the symptoms and problems arising in the system and where they occur, but they don't necessarily help us to change the underlying structures and principles that result in those particular outcomes. But they do tell us that different parts of the system are important. We need to consider the consumer use phase. We need to bear in mind how we work with raw materials and not just our own individual operations. This is just a sketch that other people have produced which describes something about the scale of the challenge. So this looks at carbon intensity and what we've achieved in carbon intensity per dollar and what we've achieved between 1980 and 2007. So we've improved the world's carbon efficiency, carbon intensity by about 23%. Then you look at the near, is that right? That's right as you look at it. We look at the right-hand side and we see the scale that we want to be able to achieve to hit some of the climate targets that we're talking about, that the IPCC are referring to. And that gives you a sense of how far we have to go. Efficiency is important, but we don't understand enough about rebound and those kind of effects to completely rely on it. We need to look more holistically at the system and try and understand how we can intervene in that better. So, there's a broad challenge. We need to use massively less greenhouse gases. We need to deliver more value to an increasing population and do it with massively less resource than we currently do it. these are broad brush challenges because as we've heard earlier, there's no one definition of sustainability that's agreed upon, but I think these are some things that we can perhaps all identify as things that the system needs to address in part. So we're asking, how do we help companies prepare for this? How do we help them plan the manufacturing configurations that might deliver and support this system? And how do we help companies accelerate the process of change? And then what needs to change about the system to help enable that process? So try and put this in context of how configurations might help. This is an example of the process that we're trying to develop, and is a very high-level sketch just to try and communicate some of the principles. So, as described earlier, we're trying to identify some goals and principles that we want to base our system on. So, what do we mean by sustainability, and what principles might help us deliver towards that goal? We then want to use those principles and the patterns and structures associated with them to describe possible future configurations. We're not predicting that these are going to be the configurations, but these are just some configurations that are implied by building a system on such principles. And then we use those to interrogate and ask questions of the configurations to try and gain insight of what we need to do now to start preparing for it so we can take action. And as described by the pragmatic approaches which have been expounded throughout today, we also need to understand what the result of our actions were. Did it have the impact on the system we were expecting? And use that to inform how we take further exploration in this area. So, working with manufacturers and those who are involved in manufacturing, for example, Marks and Spencer, as we saw yesterday, have a strong influence on their manufacturers. We might take some key concepts. I've chosen some circular concepts here. Some principles and ideas from theory which might help deliver those concepts. This is something to do with scale-free networks, which is a way of organising systems for resilience. And then we might take patterns, ideas from practice and archetypes that might help plug into some of the elements of the system and help describe how we might get there and how it might be done. So working with people who have an intimate knowledge of the current system and how you put these kind of configurations together, we would aim to develop a new configuration. What that might look like, and I'm drawing on a circular model here. So rather than make, use, dispose model that we had before, we can incorporate elements of circularity in there. We might want to introduce some customization to increase the value delivered to a particular customer for a given resource. We might want to increase the longevity of particular materials by repair and recovery and reselling. And we might eventually end up with materials that have been degraded, fibres that can no longer be reused, which have to be renewed and reconstituted, but with the aim of reducing the amount of material we take from the earth and cycling it in loops more effectively. So things that might help us with that: industrial symbiosis might help in the make phase, organising your production so that you can partner with other people who might be able to use your waste flows and resources. We saw yesterday in the reselling, partnering with other organisations can help you improve the impact. If it may not be an operation you want to get involved with, and you can leverage someone else's capability to help do that. So that's the question of what gets made. And then there's who makes it. So the extractor might have competencies in the take and renew phase that are similar. Basically, they're trying to extract value from a bunch of stuff that's mixed up. The manufacturer might just want to do the manufacturing, and M&S decide that they understand their customers best, so they want to do the customization. And because they've got the customization in-house, they've also got the same capability for repair. The user might just want to have a standard model, and then you employ someone else to get the recovery and reselling, and you rely on the commodity markets to do your large-scale recycling when things can no longer go through your product system. So this is taking a product view, but you can zoom in on any of these elements and try and take a more local approach to the system principles. Or you might go another way. The manufacturer might decide my competence is in manipulating materials, and therefore I want to do everything that involves a transformation of the product in the system. So just some high-level examples of what a future configuration might look like. But what this allows us to do is to start to have a dialogue and a conversation about what the implications of those configurations are. So you could perform a technical assessment. Do we have the feasible technologies to conduct these processes? Can we develop them, or do we need other people to support us? We heard Mike Barry and people today talk about who are the winners and losers. Does this mean that where people have been doing the extraction, we're costing them jobs and livelihoods? How do we respond to that? Each time iterating the configuration. We might engage the kind of business modeling process that Dr. Rana described this morning. How are we actually creating and delivering value? Can we take the customers with us, was a question Mike Barry asked today. What about introducing the notion of care as part of the business purpose? What impact does that have on manufacturing? Is the manufacturing system fit for purpose to deliver that notion of care? And then we can look at what-if scenarios. We looked at the material security issue just now. What if energy was 5 times more expensive? What if growth was no longer the goal? Would the system still be fit for purpose? And all of these questions and iterations of the configuration give us insight into what the role of the manufacturer is, what the role of others might be, the relationships that might be needed to deliver this, and the capabilities in developing relationships, the technology, the systemic barriers, and the policy implications. All issues that we've heard touched on this week. And it's not about developing particular solutions, but just beginning a dialogue that helps us tackle these issues and work with others in our organisations and beyond to try and solve them, with the aim of being able to take better action and faster experimentation. So we talk about experimentation. We might draw inspiration from a particular configuration and make an experiment, take action. There's progress of some sort through the system, and we want to understand what the impact of that action was. Did it have the impact we were expecting? What does that tell us about how we organise our manufacturing and the future conception of our configuration? We might take another action, make a little bit more progress, and again, but then we might do something that doesn't work. We understand that we're dealing with complex systems and not everything is going to work out right in the end. So we have to keep that monitoring cycle in place. What do we mean by experiments? Well, swapping was an experiment that M&S have taken on. We'd be interested in having the conversation about where they go next, how they deliver the next set of step changes in the way they treat their products and the relationships they develop to push that forward, all with the aim of increasing the speed and quality of their experimentation. So that's the system that we are hoping to create. And I hope that you see at least some of the principles that we've been talking about throughout the conference reflected in that. Who's going to be doing it? Well, they're sat all around you. It's quite a large and diverse group, and it's probably the most porous group in the whole centre. We like to play with anyone who gives us the opportunity to solve problems as part of it. We're obviously interested in developing knowledge and engaging with practice, learning by doing. That's been one of the themes of today. And those are the PhD students who have been involved in this most recently, and we're looking to drag as many people into the system as possible. All with the aim of developing tools and techniques, and we have a bunch of academics guiding them, helping, running related projects from which we hope to draw insight. And you'll also notice that they're one of the more beautiful groups of people you'll see in academia anywhere. So just to give a very quick outline, I won't read any of these out, and I'm very sorry, Yuan, you've dropped slightly off the bottom of the page. That's Yuan at the bottom. Yuan, can you give us a wave? Okay. But these are the kinds of things that they're working on to try and help contribute to the problem solving. So you can see a whole range of things from how we think about and plan for the future, radical innovation, business models, extending classical industrial ecologies and systems thinking, and a lot of the principles that we've based the presentation on today come from Sudhir's work. But if you haven't had a chance yet, do go visit them at the posters before you leave, because they're coming up with some really interesting insights and they're really keen to work with you and work on your problems. The project's about a year in, and one of the targets is obviously to develop knowledge throughout. We've had people who've been going off and learning from leaders. So Jules had the privilege of spending some time with John this summer. Ilka's been travelling around learning from people on radical innovation. Fen has been involved in the Great Recovery. So this is a project run by the TSB to sponsor 25 or so projects which look at what might help deliver designs for the future of the I got it wrong. New designs for a circular economy, thank you. And she's been learning about the challenges of the people that have been taking those on. And Geraldine also spent last summer with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, finding out what they're doing and the problems that they're encountering, taking things forward. We've also got people who are learning by doing. Melanie and Nancy have been involved in the same projects, but actually running them. So we're learning about how we describe configurations, the challenges that manufacturers are having dealing with these complex systems. What are the technologies that they're interested in, and how are they actually tackling the problem, and how do we actually describe these configurations effectively for sustainability? We're also getting into the world of solving real problems. We've got 2 project teams at the moment who are working with companies to tackle particular aspects of their industrial systems development. What are the next steps they're going to take? How do they experiment? And what do we learn from that? And finally, we're going to bring all this knowledge to bear by building prototype tools and techniques that will allow us to interact with more companies and try more experiments and learn what works and what doesn't in this particular system. The outputs, we will be developing quick guides like all of the rest of the projects, covering topics such as circular models, systems thinking, language, searching for partners, and thank you for your contributions to the language agenda today. I know Jules is thrilled with the amount of transcription he has to look forward to. We're going to build tools, as I said. We're going to try and understand how we build configurations with companies, how to interrogate them, how to use them as facilitations of dialogue between different elements of the business, and then how to act on the findings. You probably saw the word action on a lot of the pages today and in the descriptions of the PhD's research. This is really what we're hoping to achieve. And then finally, the configurations themselves, the principles that they're made up of, and the actual embodiments themselves, we hope to make as publicly available as possible to create dialogue with an even wider set of stakeholders and to try and stimulate that debate across a number of different arenas. So, how can you get involved? Well, first of all, we're here to learn, so we want to understand what the problems you're facing are in this particular area. How are you preparing and experimenting for the radical change of the system? What are the challenges and barriers that you face, and what are the tools that you might think you need to help overcome those? We're also keen to explore future configurations, so if anyone has any wild ideas around that, we would be delighted to work with you, and with the aim of encouraging more frequent and more effective experimentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll look forward to your questions.